You're not going to believe what just surfaced from deep inside the palace walls this week, my dear friends. It wasn't a memo or a screaming headline. It was a single shattering whisper that has been making the rounds among royal staff and close insiders. The great royal showdown everyone imagined between King Charles and Prince Andrew never actually happened with raised voices or a slammed door. No confrontation in the palace drawing room. No moment where Charles looked him in the eye across a mahogany table. Instead, the final decisive separation of two brothers happened the modern way, on the phone. And yet, that single quiet call ended decades of privilege and changed the balance of power between them forever. It made me stop and think, my friend, isn't that just how life works sometimes? The biggest breaks in our own lives don't often come from thunder and lightning. They arrive in the quiet moments. A pause, a breath, and a few words that close a chapter you thought might never end. Hi friends, it's good to have you here again. You know me. I don't chase the screaming headlines. I just pour a warm cup of tea and try to make sense of the people behind them. We talk about the royals as they really are. Not as crowns and capes, but as a family. They have all the same pride, all the same stubbornness, and yes, all the same heartbreaks the rest of us carry. Today, we're walking into a space where pride, silence, and dignity have all been called to stand trial. We'll look at the story of Charles and Andrew, what we know, what we don't, and what it truly tells us about the cost of consequence. You remember, don't you, how far Prince Andrew's fall has been? The arc of his story has been long and heartbreaking to watch. This was the man who once strutted through royal life as the Queen's acknowledged favourite. He was the war hero, the charming prince, the one who seemed born to the role of royal bachelor. But in what felt like the blink of an eye, he became a shadow of his former self. His ties to Jeffrey Epstein, those choices made years ago, simply burned through his reputation faster than any court or scandal could have predicted. The infamous BBC interview from 2019 still hangs in the nation's memory like a bad echo. Since then, it's been one slow, agonizing retreat after another. By early 2025, if you were watching closely, you saw the last royal perks slipping away. The military titles, the patronages, the official roles, one by one, they disappeared. Friends, if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel. It means a lot, and it keeps our little circle growing. Thank you. All right, let's go back to what happened. Only the basic title of Prince remained, and now even that, as the headlines have confirmed, has been taken in all but the most formal sense. But to truly understand the weight of that final phone call, we have to look much further back. If you think this confrontation began with the recent scandals, you are only hearing the last act of a very old play. Charles and Andrew's rivalry, because yes, there was a quiet rivalry, began decades ago. It started long before television interviews or legal settlements were ever on the horizon. Charles was always the dutiful firstborn, the thinker, the reader. He was the one who preferred sketching watercolors and quiet contemplation. Andrew, on the other hand, was the charming favorite. He was loud, confident, fond of parties and fast cars. They were different sons for different seasons. The Queen, their mother, adored them both. But the dynamics were clear. One was bred for duty, the other for comfort. Honestly, my friend, that imbalance sometimes breeds quiet resentment on both sides. The gap didn't close as they grew up. By the 1980s, Andrew was the playboy prince. His name was dancing in and out of the headlines. First for glamour, then for just a hint of trouble. There were photographs, the endless rumours, and all the whispers. Charles, through all of this, was already carrying the weight of tradition, even through the tragedy of his own marriage collapsing under public scrutiny. It must have felt endless for Charles, having to constantly worry about the image and stability of the monarchy. Andrew, you can just picture it, laughing it all off. You know the type. The person who genuinely believes charm will solve everything. And to be fair, for years it worked. But charm eventually stops being enough. By the 1990s, the cracks had turned into genuine fault lines. Charles was busy remaking himself as the future monarch. Andrew, having left the Navy, seemed to be drifting, constantly needing something to occupy his time. This is when he found himself cultivating friendships that, frankly, no one inside the palace approved of. This is where the Epstein connection tragically begins to shadow the timeline. It didn't choke everything immediately, but it grew like ivy, slow at first, then suddenly overpowering. People always ask, was there a confrontation? Did Charles finally say something? Here's the first big reveal, my dear friends. Most credible reports agree it wasn't in person. No grand scene at Windsor Castle, no brotherly outburst at Balmoral. It was a terse, decisive phone call. Charles, honestly, is not a man who enjoys open conflict. He is all about paperwork over passion, and he certainly prefers memos to shouting matches. So when he finally called his brother Andrew, it wasn't to debate the matter. It was simply to inform him. The decision had already been made. The machinery of monarchy was already turning without a pause. Imagine that call, my friend. Andrew waiting, perhaps expecting another delay. Maybe he thought he'd hear another promise of, "We'll discuss this soon," or another indefinite pause. And then, hearing the final quiet word. It must have been a simple phrase, maybe something like, "It's time to move forward." That, my friends, is the royal way of saying, it is over. Within days, the official channels confirmed everything. Titles revoked, duties dissolved. And then came the worst part of all. Royal Lodge, that grand old home in Windsor, was to be vacated. For a man who once outranked his younger siblings, who once felt the wind of importance at his back, it must have felt like exile in slow motion. You can feel the humiliation in that, without anyone needing to shout it aloud. Not the public shame. That had already happened years ago. This was the private kind. The deep, quiet sort that comes when your own family, your own flesh and blood, decides you're no longer fit for the table. Friends, if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel. It means a lot, and it keeps our little circle growing. Thank you. All right, let's go back to what happened. Now here's where the king's personality defines the drama. The king has been out in public, you see, smiling, planting trees, greeting school children, and of course people shout things. They always do. At Lichfield Cathedral, a protester called out sharp questions about Andrew. Charles heard them. He didn't flinch. He didn't respond. He didn't even glance. Just a faint tightening of the jaw. The tiniest, almost imperceptible shift of posture. That was it. And that, in the language of the royals, was the loudest answer of all. Because Charles doesn't do confrontation in public. He never has. He lets action do the talking. And this time, the action was brutal in its precision. One phone call, then a press release. Then the official notices. Titles removed, roles gone. No family photos. No warm statements of support. No shared appearances. That, my dear friends, is how the king delivers a message, through distance. Some reports perfectly describe the tone as formal, without emotion. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain himself twice. He just ended the conversation and the call was done. There is a cold efficiency to that, don't you think? It is the kind of silence that is colder than any harsh word, because it leaves nothing, absolutely nothing to argue with. And if you have ever been on the receiving end of that kind of silence in your own family, you know it lingers. I want to tuck in a gentle irony here, because life never misses the chance for one. Charles has spent his whole life defending causes that can look fussy until they save us. The hedgerows, the bees, the old buildings, the ancient crafts. He likes things that last. And now, as king, he finds himself defending the most fragile heirloom of all, the family reputation. You can polish silver and repair stone with mortar, but you cannot glue trust back together. You can only stop dropping it. That quiet persistence, that determination to keep cleaning the window even when a neighbor keeps flicking dust onto it, that is Charles's pride. But it is the quiet kind, the kind that sweeps instead of shouts. I read that Andrew genuinely hoped for a chance to explain himself to his brother. He wanted to make his case in person. He'd written letters before, to his mother, to Charles, even to senior courtiers, always asking for reconsideration, always hoping for a path back to public life, even a small one. But the world had moved on. The public was not forgiving. The palace wasn't budging. And the Queen, his greatest defender, the one who held them all together, was no longer there to soften the blow. There was a brief window when some insiders thought Charles might let Andrew keep a symbolic title, maybe something ceremonial, a small controlled return to grace in some reduced capacity. But that window closed quietly. Too much pressure, too much risk to the crown's image. The king, ever cautious, decided the institution must come first. So that near-miss moment, that chance for grace, simply never came. Andrew was left not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a phone call that simply drew the final curtain. And somehow, my friend, that made it more final. Because when you don't get to plead your case, you don't get to pretend the matter is unfinished. Reports say he was shocked but resigned. He said little, agreed to cooperate, and hung up. That was it, the end of a brotherhood that once laughed together through parades and polo matches. And isn't it funny, friend, how every family always has that one conversation that never happens face to face? The one that changes everything but leaves a silence where a real, honest apology should have been. The final confrontation is said to have happened after the publication of Virginia Giuffre's memoir. Fresh allegations, renewed anger, and that terrible old wound ripped open yet again. Charles couldn't ignore it anymore, not as king, not as father to the next generation. He told advisors it was the last straw. That phrase keeps repeating in every account. When Charles finally took the steps, he did, quietly, steadily. He wasn't just a king managing a headline. He was a brother stepping away from a fire because it had already burned the curtains. You see, some people called it punishment. I call it triage. A king protects the body first. You stop the bleeding before you debate the cause. The monarchy, for all its history, is a living thing. And if one limb is infected, the rest must be saved. That, to me, is not cruelty. That is survival. Dignity is not always gentle, my friends. Sometimes it's a locked door. What Charles did was draw a line between blood and duty, between private affection and public responsibility. The king chose the crown, and Andrew, for all his history and his privileged position, found out that even royal brothers are not above consequence. It's funny, in a sad kind of way, to see the sheer weight of irony in the air. Charles spent his whole life waiting to lead, and now that he does, he's discovering that leadership often means loss. Loss of friends, loss of comfort, and sometimes the most painful loss of all, loss of family peace. One brother loses his titles through scandal, the other loses his peace through enforcement. Make no mistake, this hasn't been easy for Charles either. He's not vindictive, he's methodical. He sees the monarchy as something that must survive him, and if that means freezing out his own flesh and blood, then so be it. That, my friends, is the heavy side of dignity. Doing what must be done, without warmth, without applause, without anyone really thanking you for it. I keep circling back to that phrase that has been linked to Charles and Andrew. You broke my heart. Not a palace statement, not a press release, just a whisper that felt heavier than anger. Anger, my friends, is simple. It flares, and then it finishes. Heartbreak, though, lingers. It sits on your tongue when you wake. It follows you through doors. And if you are a king, that heartbreak doesn't get smaller, it gets national. It becomes the public echo of a private ache. This phrase, "You broke my heart," rings true because it fits him better than a roar ever would. Charles governs his temper the way he arranges his papers, quietly, in straight lines. So this line is the private sentence that explains the public action. It's the tired sound of a brother who has run out of ways to tidy a mess. If you have ever loved a brother or sister who made choices you cannot defend, you know exactly why that line lives. Anger points. Heartbreak holds. Anger demands. Heartbreak decides. When Charles decided on this final action, he was saying, "You left me no choice." That to me is confession, not blame. A small, quiet reveal for you. Watch the crowd reactions whenever Andrew's name is mentioned at events totally unrelated to him. There's an audible shift. Heads tilt. Mouths flatten into a line. People don't need a press briefing to understand disappointment. They can simply smell it. Charles, for all his formality, feels a room. He knows when a subject sours the air. That knowledge bruises him deeply because it reminds him that the institution isn't fully in his hands yet. He has inherited not just a crown, but a clean-up. And then there are the near-miss moments that tell you how thin the ice is. The constant speculation that Andrew might return to public life in some reduced capacity. A whisper about a role, charity work far from the cameras, maybe a church duty. It sails for a day or two before it sinks. Why? Because grace requires consent from the crowd. And the crowd, my friends, is simply not ready. This is what it looks like when a family tries to live between forgiveness and consequence. Forgiveness can be given privately among brothers. But public trust must be earned. They are not the same currency. The palace has become a master of the delicate no. The door is not opening. Humiliation hovers by the door. I want to say something kind about Charles here, if you'll allow me. He carries the institution with a certain old-world care. He speaks softly to people who need gentleness. He listens with his head tipped to one side, as if the words are fragile and might shatter if you hold them too tightly. This is not a man who enjoys inflicting humiliation, even when it might shield him from harm. I think that is why "You Broke My Heart" sits right with us. It is sorrow without spectacle. It is grief without gossip. It says, "You did this to me, but I will not do something ugly back to you." That, to me, is dignity. Let's talk about boundaries, because they are the spine of this whole sad story. In a normal family, you can set boundaries with a firm word and a front door key that no longer fits. In a royal family, boundaries are theatre. To protect the monarchy, you have to make the boundary public. You assign it titles and dates. That stings because it turns private consequence into a public ritual. But it is the necessary price of protection. The line is clear now. The line holds. The line says, "We love you as blood, but not as brand." That is the hard, necessary sentence many families cannot say, and the monarchy absolutely must. Do I think Charles hates his brother? No, friend. Hatred is too hot for him. He likes his emotional temperature just below boiling. What I see is a deep, quiet weariness, threaded with duty. He will do what preserves the crown. He will do what preserves his mother's long labor. He will do it quietly, with as few sharp edges as possible. And if you listen for it, in the pauses between the bells and the rain, you will hear that private line repeated to himself, "You broke my heart." Not the monarchy. My heart. The small word is the important one. The story of Prince Andrew is not one of villains and heroes. It is, purely and simply, a story of consequence. Actions taken years ago have grown deep roots that now shape his life entirely. The facts are public, the consequences are real. The palace, in its own quiet way, has drawn its boundaries in calm, unshakable lines. King Charles continues to carry that mixture of pride and sorrow that is defining his reign. And the world, us included, is still learning to read between the lines of his silence. That's the true mystery of Charles, I think. He says little, but when he finally speaks, every word counts. You broke my heart. It was not just a rebuke, it was a eulogy for trust. And perhaps that is the real cost of being both king and brother. You protect the throne, but you lose a piece of your own peace. Maybe that is the lesson here, my dear friends, in families and in crowns alike. Pride can survive words, but not silence. And once dignity decides, even brothers must bow to it. So let's leave it there, over our cooling cups of tea, thinking about the quiet weight of that phone call, the one that ended an era not with a bang, but with a dial tone. As always, my dear friends, check the sources for yourself. Some reports differ, some soften the edges, but in every version the ending is the same. No face-to-face fight, just the quiet firmness of a king who finally drew the line. You'll find reports that differ on tone and timing, and that is fine. What I have given you is the human temperature in the room. A brother who feels more sorrow than rage. A king who protects the promise he made to a nation and to a mother. And a family that has learned the hard way that silence can sometimes be an act of love. Maybe that's the truth after all, my friends. Pride never lasts, but dignity does. And when your heart is broken by someone you cannot stop loving, you do what Charles appears to have done. You stand up straight, you close the door that must be closed, and you keep the rest of the house warm. Shall we top up the tea? I suspect the next chapter will not shout when it arrives. It will slip in on a quiet morning in a small notice about duties and diaries, and we will read between the lines like we always do. Until then, we hold the room steady. We let grace sit nearest the fire. And we remember even kings are brothers before they are anything else. Thank you for sitting with me, as always. We'll talk again soon. And if you love royal surprises, click on the video on your screen. That's the next chapter, and you won't believe what they did.